much for answering questions. And we are going next to, let me find her here, Moira Homann. She began her career in the Florida DEP in 2010 with a watershed evaluation and working on developing TMDLs. She subsequently joined the department's watershed planning and coordination section, working as the BMAP coordinator for surface water and springs across the state. Most recently, Ms. Homann has been working with stakeholders on developing and implementing alternative restoration plans. And welcome, Moira, and I will hand it off to you.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Good morning. And this is where all things fall apart, right?
Oh, it'll be fine.
All right, can you see which screen do you see?
Screen. This is the notes screen, the presentation screen. I think if you go back one screen and go to slideshow, I think that might go up at the top there, right there, and try clicking on slideshow. Just right to the right of animations. Down one. Right there. Try that.
Nope, that's not. I have an idea. Just a minute. Sorry.
Okay.
Try this. Let's see if this works. We've been working in Teams world, so.
Ah.
Let's try this. All right, so.
There you go. All set.
All right. All right. You see my presentation, is that correct?
I do, but you were full screen a second ago, and now I'm seeing your slide bar to the left. And the notes. Trying to recall what.
Try this again. Apologies to everybody.
Oh, no worries. Okay, now it's full screen.
Is it still full screen?
Yeah, it's still full screen.
Perfect. Okay. All right.
Okay, great. Thanks.
minor technical difficulties. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy, and good morning, everybody. My name is Moira Homann. I am a BMAP coordinator, but also an environmental administrator at the Division of Environmental Assessment and Restoration with DEP. I work in what is known as the BMAP group, or the Basin Management Action Plan group. And I am here today to present on some updates on the Volusia Blue Spring, although I do want to couch this by saying that a lot of these updates are going to be more general, and I'll explain to you why they're not Volusia Blue Spring specific. We do, as Rob mentioned earlier, have a couple of other springs that we do have restoration plans that are within Volusia County, and that's Gemini Spring and DeLeon Spring as well. But Stephen asked me to provide you an update on Volusia Blue, so we'll be focusing on that today. All right, so just in case, since it's been a while that I've gotten a chance to talk to this group, and in case we have some new folks, I wanted to kind of bring it back to why it is that we even have a Blue Spring BMAP, or Basin Management Action Plan. And the reason for that is because using our impaired waters rule, DEP verified that Volusia Blue Spring and Volusia Blue Spring Run are both impaired due to an imbalance of flora or fauna that are linked to elevated nutrients. And we're primarily concerned with nitrogen. So In 2014, DEP adopted a TMDL, a total maximum daily load, for both of these water bodies, which are shown here in this map on the right side of the screen, on the right side of the slide. A TMDL identifies the maximum amount of a pollutant that a water body can receive and still meet water quality standards. So it establishes a numeric water quality goal to restore the health of a lake, a river, or an estuary, and in this case, a spring or spring run. And essentially TMDLs are water quality goals, water quality restoration goals. The TMDL that was established for Blue Spring and the spring run is of 0.35 milligrams per liter of nitrate as a monthly average. So that is our restoration target, our restoration goal, and we have 20 years to meet this TMDL. Excuse me. So BMAPs, or Basin Management Action Plans, are the mechanism that DEP has to implement projects and implement different management strategies in order to work towards achieving our restoration goals, our restoration targets, and get water quality back to where it should be. BMAPs contain a comprehensive set of solutions that can include permit limits on wastewater facilities, urban and agricultural best management practices, different conservation programs that are designed to achieve pollutant reductions that are established by our TMDLs. Our BMAPs are broad-based plans that are developed with great input from local stakeholders, and we heavily rely on local input and commitment for the development and successful implementation of the policies and projects that go into these Basin Management Action Plans. BMAPs are adopted by secretarial order, by DEP secretarial order, and they are legally enforceable. So just a quick background on our BMAPs and what they focus on and include. The map here on the slide is showing you the Volusia Blue BMAP area, and there's 3 boundaries on that slide that I want to direct your attention to, and I'll kind of walk you through them. The first one is the dashed line, so it's a line with black dashes. This is the Volusia Blue BMAP boundary, which is approximately 108 square miles, and it includes the population centers of DeLand, Deltona, Orange City, Lake Helen, and DeBerry. The second boundary that I want to walk you through is this more pinkish magenta boundary, which is the spring shed. And I believe that both Todd and Rob did a great job at kind of explaining what a spring shed is. But just because this happened a little bit ago, I'll kind of remind you of that. So the spring shed is the area of land that contributes water to a spring or a group of springs, mainly via groundwater flow. And in this case, for Volusia Blue, it was delineated by St. John's Water Management District based on USGS, or US Geological Survey, potentiometric surface contour maps. And then the third boundary that I want to direct your attention to is the one that comes up on your screen, maybe as a little bit tan or orange line, kind of inside, more inside the BMAP boundary. And that's our PFA, or our priority focus area. And the PFA was defined in the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act as the area of the basin where the Florida Aquifer is generally most vulnerable to pollutant inputs, and where there is known connectivity between groundwater pathways and an outstanding Florida spring. And I'll get into a little bit more details of the priority focus area in my next slide. So the Volusia Blue BMAP was adopted in 2018. It was challenged in 2019 with a handful of other BMAPs. And then it wasn't until almost 3 years of being adopted and 2 years after the challenge that we had a final order issued by the DEP secretary. And that happened earlier in May of this year. And the 5 challenged BMAPs, which included Volusia Blue, were the Santa Fe River, Swanee River, Silver and Rainbow Springs, and Wakaiwa and Rock Springs. So petitioners have filed a notice of appeal to that final order issued by the secretary. However, at this time, and as of May 2021, all of our spring BMAPs are now effective and being implemented. So that's great news in terms of moving forward with the restoration, with our objective of restoration and being able to fully implement the policies and projects that we have in these BMAPs. So going back to the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act, and I know that a few presenters touched on this earlier today. So in terms of requirements for outstanding Florida Springs, the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act, which is legislation from 2016, it really detailed out several requirements, including the delineation of a priority focus area, which I mentioned earlier. And the reason for that is because that area, there are prohibited activities within that area. So there are certain things that cannot happen within priority focus areas because we know that those are the areas of greater vulnerability when it comes to the spring. Another requirement was the adoption of fertilizer ordinances for counties that have outstanding Florida Springs. That was supposed to be done by July 2017, I believe, or July 2018. And all the counties are in compliance and have adopted their fertilizer ordinances. And finally, a big component of, or a big requirement that came from that legislation, the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act, was the identification and the estimation of the pollutant load of each point source or category of point sources within our Springs BMAP boundaries. And if you look at the the pie chart here to the right of the screen, it should look familiar. Erin Reed presented that earlier in her presentation. And this is essentially the estimated load, the estimated contribution of the different sources load to groundwater. So as you can see here, the majority of the pie is comprised of septic systems. So another requirement from the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act was that if septic systems comprise more than 20% of the source of load to groundwater, then the BMAPs needed to include an OSTDS or an on-site sewage treatment and disposal systems remediation plan. So OSTDS is just a different way to say septic systems. So with that, I'm going to go into a couple of policies that we do have included in the Volusia Blue BMAP. And again, these policies are in effect as of May 2021, once we got the final order signed or issued by the secretary. So I will walk you through the remediation, the OSTDS remediation plan, which in the documents, the BMAP document is Appendix D. Displayed on this table here, you have a summary of the OSTDS remediation plans for all of our Springs BMAPs, and you'll notice they're a little bit different when we're talking about the policies for existing systems versus for new systems. So the red box is highlighting the policies for Blue Spring. And first we'll talk about the policy for existing systems. And as you can see, in the case of Blue Spring, the remediation plan focuses on, for existing systems, it focuses on the priority focus area on lots that are less than 1 acre. So based on our calculations, in order to achieve the necessary load reductions, all septic systems within the priority focus area on lots less than 1 acre need to be addressed. So as a result, the remediation plan for Volusia Blue states that modification or repair permits that are issued by Department of Health for all of systems in the priority focus area on lots less than 1 acre need to require enhanced treatment of nitrogen unless we know that sewer connections will be available based on a BMAP listed project. If we look at the policy for new systems, per statute, new systems on lots less than 1 acre are prohibited within the priority focus area. That is, so upon BMAP adoption, the OSTDS remediation plan based on statute prohibits new systems unless the system includes an enhanced treatment of nitrogen as defined by the OSTDS remediation plan, or unless the permit applicants, so whoever is applying for a permit to install a system, demonstrates that sewer connections will be available within 5 years. So again, the remediation policy is in Appendix D for our BMAP document, and it is in effect since May 2020. 21st, which is great news in terms of protection of particularly that vulnerable area in the PFA. Another one of our policies within our BMAPs is the wastewater treatment facilities policies and effluent standards that are applicable as of BMAP adoption to all new and existing wastewater facilities, treatment facilities within the BMAP area. And we're talking inside and outside the priority focus area. So there's no distinction in this BMAP. These are effluent standards that will take an effect at the time of permit renewal or no later than 5 years after BMAP adoption, whichever happens sooner. So if it's an existing wastewater treatment facility, as soon as that permit comes up for renewal, then our permitting folks will be incorporating these new, more stringent wastewater effluent standards into those permits. If presumably all of permits will come up for renewal before 5 years of BMAP adoption. If that's not the case, then those permits will be open at that time to make sure that everybody is in compliance with these new effluent standards. Additionally, any new or existing wastewater permits in the BMAP area need to require at least quarterly sampling of their effluent discharge for total nitrogen. And those sampling results need to be reported in the discharge monitoring reports, the DMR reports that get submitted to DEP. So there's a big effort going on in several of our, or in all, I should say, all of the counties that have outstanding Florida springs that directly ties in to both the OSTDS remediation policy as well as the wastewater effluent standards that we just talked about. And those are the feasibility analyses. So local governments and utilities are working to develop these master wastewater treatment feasibility analyses that need to be completed within 5 years of BMAP adoption. These are studies that are funded, completely funded by DEP, and they are for the 9 counties that are listed in this table here, which are the 9 counties that have outstanding Florida springs. And again, highlighted in the red box is Volusia County, and Volusia County is working on finalizing their feasibility analyses. I want to say that Gemini and DeLeon might be completed, but that might be a better question for Aaron or Mike Ulrich. But again, these have to be completed within 5 years of BMAP adoption. And the purpose, the goal of these feasibility analyses is to inventory existing septic systems, to document wastewater systems needed to meet requirements in the BMAP, to identify any septic systems within the priority focus areas that require remediation, to develop cost models, develop recommended alternatives, identify environmental benefits. And this is all going to be included in a big final report that then will kind of be the starting point for any future projects, focusing on sewer, septic to sewer conversion, and will help with funding as well. So with that, I'm going to move on to a somewhat newer piece of legislation that was signed in 2020, which is the Clean Waterways Act, or Senate Bill 712. It addresses multiple areas covered in BMAPs, including agriculture, wastewater, and funding. Although the focus of Senate Bill 712 was primarily on surface water BMAPs, there is language in there that is similar to the requirements outlined in the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act. So in our Springs BMAPs, we're a little bit more in compliance with what came out of Senate Bill 712, just because it included some of those requirements already. So if we do a quick comparison, and I won't get into too much detail here, but if we do a quick comparison of similarities and differences, we've got, in terms of similarities, both the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act and the Clean Waterways Act have the requirement for wastewater treatment plants and OSTDS remediation plans and handling biosolids. In terms of differences, this Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act required immediate prohibitions for septic systems, as I mentioned earlier, particularly in the priority focus areas. And there's different reporting requirements that I'll get into here in the next slide. So in terms of implementing the Clean Waterways Act, again, this was legislation from 2020. And it requires DEP to report on water quality monitoring in each of our our nutrient BMAP areas. And it also required us to summarize the costs and benefits of BMAP wastewater projects. So all the projects that are included in our BMAPs that address wastewater. So these two reports, which are listed here, and these two bullets were published by July 1st, 2020, which is when we had to have them published by, and they're accessible on our BMAP webpage. I'm happy to include the link to them in the chat box if anybody's interested in accessing them. So that first report, excuse me, that wastewater project report explains the different types of projects and management strategies included in BMAPs, and it provides detailed information about each of the BMAPs wastewater projects. And the monitoring gap report, it describes the current monitoring efforts in each of our BMAPs, identifies monitoring gaps, it proposes changes to fill those gaps, and estimates costs of the improvements to fill in those monitoring gaps. As mentioned in the previous slide, it does 712 does include requirements for wastewater treatment facilities and OSTDS remediation plans, which we'll be looking at closely in our Springs BMAPs to adjust as needed to make sure we're compliant with that. It also has specific requirements for agriculture with increased reporting, requirement for implementation and the development of regional projects. There's also a big, not only did we have to identify monitoring gap reports, but there's a big push for extended water quality monitoring, which falls on DEP, and then stormwater rule updates, which are currently in the works with our stormwater TAC group. And that's been an ongoing effort. So quickly, some BMAP related updates. Again, these are sort of in general BMAP related updates. Because Blue Spring has been under challenge over the past several years, we have not been collecting project information for Volusia Blue or the other 4 challenged BMAPs. So that will change here in the next year for the next project collection period. But I do want to let you know that we have been working with stakeholders in these challenged BMAPs regardless, kind of keeping tabs on different efforts. So I'm going to walk you through a few efforts that have been ongoing. The first one is monitoring. That goes back to information that we gathered for that report for 712. So our 3 cornerstones of springs monitoring are surface water, or spring vent monitoring, groundwater, and biology. We sample for surface water at or near the spring vents. Groundwater sampling is our groundwater well sampling, and then biological monitoring, which gives us a whole different set of information. So we've identified gaps, monitoring gaps that we have for those 3 types of monitoring: surface, groundwater, and biological. And we're working on filling in those data gaps. And I think a big effort that we have currently right now is with a Springs bioassessment group, which Rob Madsen has been a very important part of. So this is a DEP and some of the water management districts folks are working together to come up with a pilot, or we have come up with a pilot project to kind of take a deeper dive into biological monitoring and the different types of samplings and different types of parameters that we can sample when we're looking at biology, because that's a big part of spring health, and making sure that we're looking at the big picture and how impacts to water quality and different land uses are affecting flora and fauna in our springs. So that's been a big effort, and stay tuned because we've just started going out to our pilot project sites and gathering information. So that'll be an important missing piece of information in some of our springs. Another big project has been the creating a document for green stormwater infrastructure, GSI, and sensitive groundwater areas. So this document is meant to provide guidance on the use of green stormwater infrastructure, specifically in sensitive groundwater areas. So our spring sheds definitely fall into that. This document is not meant to be a rule. It's just a guidance document that will provide examples and details of green stormwater infrastructure. Staff that are involved with the stormwater rule, with the revision of the stormwater rule, have participated in the different workshops that we've had for this particular effort. So we have had their input, and they're also excited to see how they can incorporate that into into where stormwater is moving to with the different revisions. We have a draft document we're working on and are hoping to have a final document by 2021. This document will reside on a website. We're still trying to figure out where, and we're hoping that the different sections of that document will guide different audiences for better practices when it comes to GSI and sensitive groundwater areas. Our Springs education outreach effort has been ongoing since 2018. We created this group after the Springs BMAPs were adopted. This was to bring together a group of folks who are primarily involved in outreach, just so that we had a better understanding of what each, different counties, cities, groups were doing in order to not have to redo or reinvent the wheel in terms of what has been working. Again, the focus was Springs education outreach. We've had good discussions on funding, as well as outreach activities and what different entities are doing. We focus on how to engage the public on Springs protection. So I know that was something that Todd mentioned earlier, how important education is. So that's kind of been the goal of this group, to come together and not repeat efforts and learn from each other what works and what hasn't worked. So this is an ongoing effort, and I know that some of you have probably been involved in those conversations. So thank you for your time for that. I'm going to talk very quickly about three other big efforts that we have going on, just so that you can get a little bit more information. So our BMAP webpage has information on all of our BMAPs, and if you click at the very bottom of the table that you'll get to when you go to our BMAP webpage, you'll find the Florida Springs BMAP story maps, or if you click on this slide or on this link here, it'll bring it up, and that will give you a really good overview of all of our Springs BMAPs. So you'll see 3 tabs when you open there, and if you go to the locations tab on the far right, then it'll list the 13 Springs BMAPs that we have. And as you click on each one of them, it'll go into a lot more detail on the policies for those. And again, the ones that have been in effect since 2018 will have a little bit more information specific to their projects. We'll be filling that in with project-specific information for our challenge BMAPs next year. So speaking of projects and project information, our BMAPs are essentially the meat of our BMAPs are the projects and the restoration actions that are implemented by different stakeholders, and that can be counties, municipalities, special districts, wastewater utilities, agricultural operations, state agencies, and different stakeholders. So this is where you will find all that information. So as required by 403-0675, this report updates the status of our BMAPs and our BMAP projects on a yearly basis. It has to be compiled and submitted to the legislature by July 1st every year. So this is the link to the star down here, the statewide annual report. And this report provides you information on all the projects for all the BMAPs. So as you click through it, if you click on Outstanding Florida Springs, it'll then list the map, the interactive map on the right side will change, and it'll give you, it'll display all of the Springs BMAPs, and you can click on each one of those. And as you click through those, you'll see the different types of projects that are included in that BMAP by status. So whether it's completed, ongoing, underway, or planned. You'll get information on the lead entity, the project name, project type, location, also the reductions associated with those projects. So this is where everything comes together in terms of the good work that our stakeholders do. And this is also how we keep tabs of how we're doing in terms of our progress towards achieving those milestones and those reductions that we need to be getting to in order to achieve that restoration target and water quality. So again, I can add this link to the chat if you're interested in visiting our star, and you can let me know if you have any questions on that. And then tying into our statewide annual report, we're very excited that we are putting together a portal for BMAP project collection. If you've been involved in BMAP project collection for several years, you know that it's been kind of a clunky process where we have a lot of back and forth, having our stakeholders update their information in Excel spreadsheets. And we work with more than 400 Excel workbooks across the state. So the plan is to streamline our process and to allow better quality assurance, quality control when we're talking about, when we're going back and forth with updating our projects. We want to better track any changes. We are running a pilot that will start in mid-November. So we have reached out to some reporting entities to request their participation for this pilot. And if you are one of those entities, we thank you for agreeing to participate with us. We're hoping everything will run smoothly and we'll have this open for everybody, everybody meaning stakeholders with project responsibilities as of next year. And then finally, in terms of BMAP status, so now that we have these BMAPs, again, the challenge BMAPs are fully in effect and being implemented, we are able to start looking at current data in terms of water quality data, as well as where we are with reductions and getting updates on projects. So that will allow us to do a review of our milestones. We had set 5, 10, 15-year milestones in all of our Springs BMAPs in order to be able to get to that restoration, that water quality TMDL target within 20 years. So we gave us a 5-year buffer between years 15 and 20 to make any further adjustments. So with we'll be looking again at new and updated information to review those milestones as needed. We will be updating our BMAPs to make sure that we're compliant with the requirements set forth by 712, adding in any information that needs to be included to be able to check off those boxes, as well as updating them with any new information, whether it be land use changes or additional septic tank changes, or the information that we'll be getting from these feasibility analyses that the entities or that the counties are working on for wastewater. So we have a lot of work coming up, and we will be starting to reach out to folks in our different basins and have conversations with you all. Again, these are very locally driven, stakeholder heavy plans. So we'll be relying on your local expertise and information to update these. And unfortunately, I'm guessing our meetings will be virtual for now, but hoping to be able to start traveling and seeing people in person soon. And with that, thank you for your attention and your time, and for the invitation to present today. And I'll open it up for any questions.
Presentation. I'm going to hop down into the Q&A and see what we have. Okay, here we go. Developers set up HOAs without regard to the conservation of water. Can't BMAPs and DEP enforce regulations on types of plants? I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but i.e., no St. Augustine grass.
That unfortunately it is not in our wheelhouse.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, we can work, like part of the goal of that Springs Education Outreach Group has been to communicate with counties and the cities and, water management districts on what they do to educate homeowners associations. And I think Deidre was talking about that too, but in terms of enforcement, that's not something we could do, I don't think.
Okay. And speaking of enforcement, under the Clean Waterways Acts, under agriculture, there's a requirement for implementation. After the requirement for implementation, is there a next step for oversight or enforcement of that requirement?
I think they're doing verification of the implementation. So they're going out and doing more verification, but that would be a better question for our DAX folks.
Okay, that's fine. And then another one about the conversion of septic to sewer, which is the big chunk in a lot of the problem here. The sources of funding, are you able to use any ARPA? What is your major source of funding for the conversion of septic to sewer, and can you use ARPA funds?
Not familiar with ARPA.
Oh, the American Rescue Plan Act, that was just because of the pandemic.
I've heard about it, but I'm not very familiar with it. I believe that you can use, I think you can use 319 funds that from DEP, and the SRP, the state revolving SRF, not SRP.
Okay.
state revolving fund is also another another source of, that's a loan. But I know, we work very closely with, with Volusia County when there's projects available to become familiar with them. And then when they come into the pipe to get funding, we're able to say, well, we know this is going to be a good project, and we recommend that. I do believe that 712 does have funding that is specifically for wastewater related efforts. So that's another source of but our folks from our Division of Water Restoration Assistance, I can put the link in the chat, would be good sources of reference. I like to call them our Division of Money Giving Away folks.
Oh, very good. Yeah,
they have all the information, but I think 319 grants, and I believe there is money that came attached from 712 that is specifically for wastewater.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be the biggest hurdle for most people.
And we also have the money that's allocated to spring specific projects too. So that's that's
right. Great. One last question about when you're talking about feasibility analysis with a 5-year plan and the adoption, and you said that you amend them and your schedule is 5, 10, and 15 years. Say at the end of the 5 years, you go in and you find that the criteria aren't strict enough for what you want to achieve. What is the process of revising the BMAP as you go?
So one of the obvious, I think, management strategies or policies to amend or to revise if we're not where we need to be is expanding what we call our policy envelope for our the OSTDS remediation plan for existing tanks. So if you remember that table I showed in Volusia, we focused only to start off on septic tanks, existing septic tanks in lots less than 1 acre within the priority focus area. So as we, revise and look at our milestones and see where we are with our reductions, if only addressing that group does not get us to where we need to get to, we can expand that policy beyond that and say, maybe, all right, we're going to look at all lots within the priority focus area and expand those requirements of enhancing those septic systems or having to convert them or having to connect them to sewer. We've had to, in Volusia, we were fortunate, I should say, that we didn't have to start off with so much. We could look at a smaller area. In other areas like Silver and Rainbow Springs, it's the entire BMAP area, all lots, regardless of size. So those are the kinds of, the kinds of adjustments that we would be making. So we'll be looking at the results from the feasibility study and say, okay, well, now we know where can we sewer, where can we not, what's feasible, what isn't, and that'll help guide us kind of in our revisions to any policies that we have.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Moira, for your presentation today. Really appreciate your expertise and your time.
Yes,
and next up, we have Gabby Milch.